Elon right, GM, Ford, etc. bankrupt within 5 years. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We wanted to, our show title today, a bit unusual, bringing in GM to the Tesla discussion. Wanted to first take time to thank our Patreon subscribers as well as our subscribers and those of you who like our show. Always appreciated, and we appreciate the opportunity once again to be in conversation with you as we count down to the S&P entry of Tesla. So this show today could have had a number of titles, but one of our fun discussions is bringing Bob Lutz into discussion because, as you know, he was a GM executive, which is what he's primarily known for, but he was at Ford, he was at BMW, he was at a lot of different companies. And the strategic corporate planning for many of those companies were established with his help and others over the last 30 or 40 years. And interestingly enough, it's been fun to watch him make public comments about corporate strategy of GM and others, in particular GM, despite the fact that he's no longer there, and those plans of corporate strategy are still being used. Hence the reason why we've made a point of bringing him up again repeatedly. So today's show has sort of a few working parts to really get to the meat of it, but there's a question that's lurking over all of this, and the question is it possible some of the biggest companies in the world like GM end up going bankrupt as a result of Tesla's prominence or the implementation of their business plan? And the answer from people like Gordon Johnson is GM has too many assets, et cetera, to go bankrupt and is way more powerful than Tesla. Therefore, everything's fine. They're all good to go. Good point, but we want to run through some ideas today that might cause you to think otherwise. So the first issue is, as I just shared, the landscape has kind of changed. What you may have noticed is that, in essence, Mary Barra, Bob Lutz, etc., has basically said that Elon is right. What do I mean by that? Well, Bob Lutz, if you recall, 3 years ago pointed out that by 2021, GM has a list of 24 vehicles that they've announced that they're going to deliver. And once those vehicles hit, Tesla's done. Well, guess what? 2021 is right here, and GM has very little, if anything, to show for all the announced vehicles that they talked about. So, hence, the other thing that's happened is Bob Lutz actually made the suggestion that don't worry, with the power and money of all the global OEM big brands, they'll easily be able to eclipse Tesla in terms of the parameters of performance. In particular, what he focused on why Tesla would fail is that what was going to happen is that batteries would become somewhat of a commodity, just like other commodity parts to vehicles, and that all the major OEMs would simply integrate these batteries, and that would be the end of Tesla. The problem with that one is that, number one, obviously, battery hasn't worked out as they planned. As we predicted, actually, what actually is going on with those batteries is that, number one, there's a short supply of them, partially driven by raw material availability. Number two, there's also this big problem, nightmare, of the fact that you have two major manufacturers, perhaps call it LG and SK, maybe one other Korean manufacturer, Samsung. A lot of batteries have to go into phones and other things, so that's being consumed, and those new factories are actually being built. The problem that we were seeing with those build out of factories to service the large companies, one, how many batteries could you build based on how many plants could you get up quickly? The other question was, what's going to happen with the form function of those batteries, in that not only did you have to get a plant done, but we've seen an evolution from LG and others to transition from batteries that can't be heat and cooled easily because they're very large, to a structure much like Tesla, where you have smaller and smaller packs inside of the battery packs, and therefore you can run thermal management systems through it to cool them easier. So there is evolution or innovation going on there to close the Tesla gap in terms of how these entities are structured. And so therefore, yeah, there's a gap that's closing. Tesla's introduction of the battery factory recently suggests that there is this competitive advantage or value added to battery ownership. And another problem that we saw with this battery decision is, with the battery being half the cost of the vehicle, perhaps, or the battery pack and the thermal management system, et cetera, it created this interesting problem where a lot of the innovation for success of those vehicles might include sort of slight changes in pack size, et cetera, et cetera. And so the companies couldn't afford to have it that far away. But the biggest problem we saw with this, which is what GM is talking about right now in their partnership with LG, is that markups. So when Tesla built its factory, Gigafactory, you'll notice that something like, let's say there's 5,800 employees there as of a year ago, something like 2/3 of them are actually on the Panasonic side of the house, and the rest is building out motors and other things for Tesla. But the problem that came up was, how do you deal with the fact that if you don't partner with your battery producer, you have this problem where the battery producer's markup pretty much makes you not competitive in the marketplace for sales once you try to go to market after including your supplier's markup. So in theory, now that GM is partnering with LG, once they produce a battery pack, they, because of the investment they made of, I think, $2 billion into that plant, they now have an interesting situation where they're able to perhaps cut the cost of purchasing those batteries from their plant and using them in their cars in half, because they are now partnered on a 50-50 basis perhaps with LG to deliver those cells. Now, it's interesting because GM, when they were doing things previously, were just buying the batteries outright, but have now switched strategies, and it's totally in line with how Tesla's operating. And we think it makes sense, but it also is a validation where Marie Barra, et cetera, have to say, hey, this is the way you have to go if you want to compete in the world that was kind of created by Tesla. I have in my notes here something I call McKinsey sucks because we've been good. The idea I had here was just the fact that there's McKinsey and all these different companies that are excellent, Bain & Company, et cetera. There are excellent companies that sort of study process and innovation and then deliver how things should be done. And places like GM and Ford and those folks really pride themselves on having a command of the auto industry for over 100 years. And the process of implementing that advantage over time, they consider to be their bailiwick. So you really don't see outside experts being allowed in to really question core logic that's going on. Now, it's interesting because one of my big disappointments, as I've been blessed to cover Tesla with your support, is that it's our belief that we're in a bet the company mode right now for GM, for sure Chrysler and Ford, and then other large OEMs around the world. What we mean by that is that there's this problem that happens in Silicon Valley where if you miss a window by 6 months to a year and a half, it's possible that you're completely done from that business. So for example, there are endless numbers of examples. Did you know the reason why iPhone became so big was because of Nokia? It turns out that in order to create apps and put them on the Nokia phones, they wanted between $5,000 and $10,000 per app. Apple said, we'll take $100 plus a share of the profits that your app enjoys. Now, that little innovation, just that one thought, is the reason why Nokia no longer exists as a company. So what I'm suggesting is that we're in the process now of the large OEMs making decisions about how they're structured, how they're building, that will decide whether or not they stay in business in the future and all their employees starve or lose their jobs or not. And so I think this is a really sort of big moment for many, many big companies because of how all this works and how Silicon Valley forces your hand in terms of how you have to interact with the market space. I am fascinated. I mean, one of the most amazing points on this whole thing is there's a guy named Bob Nardelli. As you'll recall, he was a senior executive at GE that didn't make it. He actually became, I believe, the CEO of Home Depot and did well there as their CEO. But I saw a piece on CNBC where he was congratulatory of Mary Barra because of her process of profits generated by GM. And in particular, one of the profit elements was her decision to sell Europe and actually send the cash back to shareholders. And I just thought it was amazing when I saw that piece because as she did that, it was the exact time that she was supposed to use that money to actually go ahead and build a gigafactory, which had been done by now, so that they can start producing battery products domestically. But no, she elected to give the cash back. And I thought at that point, when Nardelli and the rest of the business community was giving Ms. Barra credit, I was stunned that she's now jeopardizing the entire company for $2 billion. And it's interesting to note that guess how much money they just put into this stupid plant with LG? Yep, you guessed it, $2 billion. So the very $2 billion that they could have used 2 or 3 years ago from Europe to get a gigafactory done now, they're now spending now on a plant that'll be done in 2 or 3 years, which may be too late. One other quick bet the company element that lurks here is IBM's decision when it did its PCs. They did a good job of skunkworks on that, building the product, but they used Microsoft as the operating system. And we all know which company is bigger right now, Microsoft or IBM. And I also wanted to point this out because there can be very minor decisions that seem like minor decisions for companies. For example, IBM deciding Microsoft should be the operating system on that machine, that can all of a sudden become the death knell for all these firms. So one of the problems or things that I was wondering about research-wise was there is a company in Silicon Valley called Cisco Systems. So Cisco has a process over the last, I've been studying it casually for the last 20 or 30 years, or definitely last 20, more like 25 years, where they're one of the spinoff kings of Silicon Valley. So think about Cisco, which is doing okay, not great, but still in the game, and think about HP. One of the things that happened innovation-wise over time is that Cisco developed a business model process where they would they would put together a skunkworks team, and they would spin off somewhat of a subsidiary, and all it was a management team, new technology that they wanted to see if it worked well in the marketplace, et cetera. And then what they would do is once that business was running, had customer relationships and was rolling, Cisco would simply pay off the management team and bring that firm back in-house and then start distributing their products across their global and get rid of the sales setup, et cetera, that was set up as they did the spinoff. Now, when I heard this at first, I was thinking, man, what a great opportunity to get spun off and funding for a company like Cisco. And then after you're successful, you come back in and you make a killing as you potentially come back in as an executive or just get your money and get to rolling afterwards. And so I just thought this was a little bit cuckoo and that it kind of didn't make sense to pay all these people a lot. So I came across an article that I'm going to read briefly a portion of. It's called Why Skunkworks Need to Die. So there's a gentleman named Steve Blank, and I guess I'll include a link to it. And the idea, Steve Blank is a lecturer at the Haase School of Business, UC Berkeley. And there's a bunch of taglines he has here, but one that talks about continuous disruption requires continuous innovation. So there's a need for continuous innovation in order to create and deliver disruptive products. But I wanted to give you an ending to this that I think is unfortunate for many of the biggest auto companies in the world. And what he talks about in that article is the fact that lessons learned is the bottom of his article. And it says skunkworks were advanced disruptive product groups, organizational, isolated from the rest of their company. So you want to isolate these skunkworks in their own silo because you potentially have corporate bureaucracy or bloat start to lurk and impact the viability of those skunkworks. Skunkworks had control over their sales channel and had direct customer feedback. So this talks about the Cisco model of you spin off that small company, it goes out and builds products and then has everything sales channel, including customer feedback, so you can ensure this thing actually works. Again, looking at Cisco, there are other companies that do it, but I think they've done a great job of it. World-class R&D groups that didn't control the channel often saw their innovation die internally. Now, that comment really grabbed me because one of the things that's funny about GM is Bob Lutz explained the reason why they put their electric vehicle inside of basically a $5,000 body when we look at the Bolt, fully electric. And the idea Lutz articulated was that there was a theory by most of the people at GM that most of the people interested in electric vehicles would be kind of fruits and nuts that had a very strong planetary concern, but they didn't have any money. So they had to figure out a way to keep the cost as low as possible so that they could test the concept and then sort of grow from there. But this sort of shows keeping that innovation internally. The question I'm wondering about is, what if they put cattle-like accoutrements or features that push the price of the car up another 10 or 15K out as their first electric vehicle, a la what happened with the Model S? All of a sudden, consumers at the high end would suddenly be, riding in a GM product that would be sort of, I think, in a great shape. Skunkworks looked much like a startup. Skunkworks epitomized innovation by exception. Companies now need to innovation by design, innovation and execution that work side by side. We now know how to do this. So again, I reference Skunkworks needs to die. So the idea, when I initially read the title, was like, whoa, I don't think that's a good idea. I think those skunkworks really need to exist. But the process of skunkworks used by a lot of these large companies is what they're saying needs to die. And I'm wholeheartedly in agreement with this. So one of the other things that's been going on in this whole pot is a discussion in Wall Street requesting that GM spin off its electric operations into a separate company. And I just thought it was interesting how similar the recommendation were on skunkwork products about having your own sales channel and direct customer contact being exactly the clamoring that seems to be going right now relative to GM, which obviously has not occurred. So I wanted to sort of roll through this because there's this really confusing thing going on where all of a sudden the direction that GM was going in, which was in essence, Elon Musk is nuts, according to Bob Lutz, we're going to get him because we have more money and we have the best engineers in the world and the best management teams to implement that. That whole party has just not worked out. And so now we have the Elon, you were right. We need to come after you with everything we've got. And we need to structure like you. We need to, have cell packs that are similar to your structure. So by Elon and Tesla operating on the first principles of physics, you all of a sudden have this phenomenon that's rolling over. And basically that phenomenon is that, electric vehicles do work and it's an excellent product and even rich people want to ride in them. The last sort of comment I wanted to make sort of on this segment about this whole thing was the sort of the performance transition that happened, where we went from everybody knew your car could perform because it was louder than the other vehicles, it had a bigger engine, and it consumed more fuel. And so one of the amazing parts of covering Tesla has been to watch Tesla's deliver the type of performance that only electric can and internal combustion cannot. And then watching the response of folks like me who were hoping to one day have a really big engine on the hood so we could do the 1950s style drag racing where you blow people's doors off and there's a roar that goes with it. That whole party is sort of blown up by Elon and the electric process. So I think this is a very unfortunate circumstance based on what's described here, and I'd have to agree with him. One way to determine if a company is going to go out of business is if they don't have a skunkworks that can build electric products and then allow the bigger company to bring them back in and sell those electric products through their channel, because the bureaucracy has every reason to choke off that innovation and not let it successfully get to market. So one last example of this that I've always been amazed by is there's a company called AMG that was a tuner. Basically, they would take high-end Mercedes and modify those vehicles for people who wanted very, very high performance cars. And the net result was just these monster performing Mercedes cars. And a lot of very wealthy folks decided to pay up for those innovations. And sure enough, they had worked closely with GM or with Mercedes-Benz for many years. And then Mercedes finally bought them, and now there's more of a seamless integration between the two companies, obviously because they were purchased. But the point was this skunkworks was able to build product solutions and have direct customer relationships that validated the process of what they were doing. And I would say the answer to the question right now is, hey, if you don't have some skunkworks that in essence are building products that can destroy the parent company's business with how good that vehicle is, I don't know if you're going to exist anymore as a company, I think is the answer that's sort of coming up. Now, I just think it's really unfortunate for all the jobs that'll be lost as we transition to electric, but I'd rather have some jobs lost at some of our big companies like GM than have the whole company lost because you're trying to appease sort of two different sides that don't work well together. One of the perhaps last points that I love business, love learning. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a battle to determine whether Kmart or Walmart would win out. One of the things that happened was that there's something called the circular and blue light specials. So the folks at Kmart developed the blue light special out of their circulars, and they had to pay for the printing cost and all the activity related to that thing. And once Walmart came in with its lower prices, they were making an attempt to switch over, get rid of the circular, just lower prices so they could match Walmart. And a large enough portion of their customers were like, no, we like our blue lights, our blue light specials and the circulars that go out with those discounts. So we ain't going in there if you don't maintain it. The problem was that by maintaining it, it put them at a cost disadvantage to Walmart. And we saw how that happened. Walmart basically rolled over them, and Kmart is in a bankruptcy run after being purchased by Sears. So it's interesting to see how customer behavior can keep companies sort of locked in producing internal combustion engines when the whole market is going electric. And now you have companies that are trying to serve two masters not so successfully. So I really think this whole idea of a spinoff is a smart one, and those who do embrace the idea of that spinoff, I think, will exist short and long term, and those who don't, I think, may actually be done because of everything we just talked about. At any rate, we look forward to your comments here. As usual, we enjoyed our Bob Lutz review because he's been a constant source of interesting facts and knowledge for us. And I'm happy you're able to sort of ride our train with us. I look forward to your comments. I actually am wanting to dive back into the GM because they've been fighting electric now for over 65 years, where they bought up all the electric transit facilities around the country and replaced them with diesel buses. And it was a very profitable move back post World War II, or right around that time, and gave them a lot of sales and gave us a lot of pollution over that time. But it actually has been good for GM and the tire manufacturers, et cetera, but not the rest of the health of people as well as the health of the planet in the process. And so this is one of the reasons why I really, really enjoy the process of covering Tesla, because there's an innovation process that's really helping the world do better, be better, and for us to breathe better air, et cetera. And I think that's awesome. So now we get on to our health tips. For today, I wanted to review kind of our usual, don't forget your 25 leg lifts per leg. All you have to do is sit in a chair with a 25-pound leg lift and just raise one leg up to parallel to the ground, and then put it down, and then same thing the other leg. The next thing we wanted to encourage you is no more than once a week fried foods. Also encourage you to consider a very light salad if you're about to do lovemaking, because blood flow to your stomach is impactful, because it takes blood flow to do a lot of different things, including lovemaking. Also wanted to encourage you to consider a 5-2 or other fasting diet. Most of the 200 doctors we surveyed, about 60-65% are involved in some kind of fasting of different types. There is the 5-2 diet. We've had people, one of our MD PhDs from NIH was saying that he sort of drinks coffee or liquids until about 2 in the afternoon. He'll eat perhaps 2 meals, one at 2 o'clock, the other one when he gets home with the family at about 7. And so he's on a constant fast. So there are all these different routes you could go, but we're encouraging you to consider trying something like that out. Also wanted to encourage you to try to maintain the same sleep schedule daily. That allows your body to synchronize with that circadian rhythm, and I think you'll find you get better rest and less sleep problems that might go with it. At any rate, this is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss German, au revoir French, Lehitrod Hebrew, Choda Hafez Farsi. In Jamaica we say, hey do Swedish, Zdravstvuyte, Russian, Namaste, Hindi, do widzenia, Polish, and Ohio gozaimasu, Japanese. Have a great day. Bye for now. Thanks for joining us. And come on, Tesla. We're up pre-market about $10. We look forward to a nice pop in the stock price over the next few days. And Monday, Tuesdays are great days to trade Tesla. And we're going to have another show on later today to discuss what the trading environment looks like for the week for Tesla, particularly as we get more data from the markets being open. Once again, thanks for joining us, and have a great day. And in Jamaica, we say, enough respect, walk good man.